January 1944. A cold wind swept across the rugged cliffs of a remote Pacific island. Concrete and steel jutted from the volcanic rock, a labyrinth of tunnels and gun emplacements carved into the earth. Japanese sentries moved silently along narrow passages, rifles slung over their shoulders, eyes scanning the horizon. The fortress was said to be impregnable. Thick walls, hidden artillery, interlocking fields of fire. Waves crashed below, carrying the scent of salt and iron. Inside, soldiers whispered of the fortress's invincibility, of a place no enemy could ever conquer. Engineers adjusted heavy doors, checked ammunition stocks, and reinforced gun ports that could fire in every direction. Outside, the jungle hid anti-aircraft guns and artillery positions, planted with meticulous care. From the sea, the silhouette of the fortress seemed unassailable, a steel and concrete promise of Japanese dominance. Yet far across the ocean, American commanders studied maps and intelligence reports, their focus elsewhere. The fortress, so feared by its builders, would remain untouched, its existence known but strategically ignored. The war would move around it, leaving its walls and guns waiting for an enemy that would never arrive. By late 1941, the Pacific was a theater of calculated aggression and rapid expansion. Japan's strategy relied on shock and speed, seizing territory before Allied powers could react. Within months, Japanese forces occupied the Philippines, Malaya, and numerous islands across the Pacific, establishing defensive perimeters designed to delay counterattacks. Among these, certain islands were transformed into fortified strongholds, engineered to hold against overwhelming odds. The fortress in question was one such creation, conceived not merely as a defensive position, but as a statement of permanence, a symbol of Japan's commitment to the southern advance and its ability to deny access to any enemy fleet. Construction began with careful site selection. Volcanic rock cliffs provided natural barriers, limiting avenues of approach. Engineers used forced and conscripted labor to carve tunnels deep into the bedrock, linking gun emplacements, storage bunkers, and command posts. Thick concrete walls, some exceeding 3 meters, were reinforced with steel and designed to withstand bombardment from battleships and aircraft. Hidden openings allowed machine guns and artillery to cover every conceivable line of attack. Ammunition depots were placed underground, insulated against fire and blast. Water, fuel, and food stores were stockpiled to sustain hundreds of soldiers for months, creating a self-contained defensive machine. Japanese command viewed such fortresses as integral to their absolute defense strategy. By late 1943, the focus of the Pacific War was shifting. American forces had recovered from early setbacks and began planning counteroffensives. Island-hopping campaigns were under consideration, operations that would bypass heavily fortified positions, isolating them rather than engaging in costly frontal assaults. Intelligence reports catalogued fortifications, troop strength, artillery placements, and terrain obstacles. Reconnaissance flights, intercepted communications, and local informants produced detailed maps, confirming the fortress's reputation as nearly impregnable. Inside, soldiers adapted to the isolation. Daily routines were regimented, guard shifts, equipment checks, and maintenance of the fortress's intricate systems. Morale varied, tempered by pride in the construction and by awareness of the vast ocean separating them from reinforcements. Drill and discipline coexisted with quiet tension. Officers inspected positions, measured ranges, and drilled contingencies. Every corridor, every firing port, every reinforced wall reflected strategic intent. By January 1944, the Pacific Theater was entering a critical phase. American forces were regrouping, building strength for operations in the Central Pacific. Campaigns in the Gilbert and Marshall Islands were underway, designed to secure bases for further advances. Commanders faced the difficult calculus of engaging Japanese strongholds or bypassing them to maintain operational momentum. The fortress stood in this context, a heavily armed sentinel, formidable yet increasingly irrelevant in the larger strategic picture. The Japanese perception of invincibility was absolute. Maps showed overlapping fields of fire. Observation posts allowed early detection of ships and aircraft. Anti-aircraft guns bristled along cliff edges, ready to intercept incoming bombers. Troops believed their position could resist siege indefinitely. Engineers had constructed escape tunnels and hidden caches to extend resistance, anticipating long engagements. Every aspect of the fortress was designed to enforce a single outcome, an attacker's defeat. Yet the broader calculus of war was shifting. The United States Navy and Army, focused on speed and attrition, identified that certain fortresses could be isolated. Engaging them directly would consume men, material, and time, resources better used to advance toward Japan's inner defensive lines. Strategic planning now emphasized mobility, amphibious landings, and cutting supply lines rather than confronting every entrenched position. In this way, the fortress, magnificent and complete, was about to become an anomaly. A fortress built for battle but destined to witness the war pass by. The soldiers inside prepared, unaware that the war's direction had shifted around them. The fortress's tunnels echoed with drills, artillery tests, and the quiet confidence of men convinced of their invulnerability. Outside, reconnaissance planes traced its perimeter, noting guns, bunkers, and terrain. High Command catalogued the information, but the decision had been made. The fortress would not be assaulted. It would remain, a monument to engineering and strategy, while the Pacific conflict moved toward its decisive moments. This realization, though invisible to those within the walls, sets the stage for the multiple perspectives that reveal the fortress's place in history, human, technological, tactical, and moral. While the fortress's walls rose in isolation, the Pacific War accelerated elsewhere. American forces, recovering from early defeats in the Philippines and Wake Island, had begun constructing a coherent strategy, island hopping. Rather than confronting every Japanese stronghold, planners chose to seize strategically positioned islands, establish airfields, and cut supply lines to more formidable positions. Commanders reasoned that bypassed fortresses, no matter how well defended, could be contained and neutralized over time without costly frontal assaults. Intelligence played a critical role. Reconnaissance flights provided aerial photographs of the fortress, revealing its massive gun emplacements, camouflaged bunkers, and labyrinthine tunnels. Signals intelligence intercepted Japanese communications detailing troop rotations, ammunition stores, and logistical movements. Reports confirmed the scale and sophistication of the defensive works. Engineers and cartographers translated these observations into precise maps. American planners faced a choice: attack an entrenched, well-supplied position at potentially enormous cost, or circumvent it, preserving resources for operations that would bring them closer to Japan itself. The decision to bypass was informed by experience. Previous assaults on heavily fortified positions, such as the campaigns in Tarawa and Kwajalein, had highlighted the deadly efficiency of Japanese defenses. Infantry losses were high, artillery and armor could be neutralized by hidden positions, and air support often proved insufficient against well-concealed emplacements. Commanders noted that isolating such positions allowed them to maintain operational momentum. Strategically, this fortress, while impressive, did not block the advance toward Japan's inner defensive perimeter. Japanese leadership, however, had envisioned a different outcome. They expected American forces to engage, anticipating a battle that would demonstrate the fortress's superiority. Defensive plans emphasized overlapping fields of fire, mutual support between artillery positions, and layers of obstacles to slow attackers. Soldiers inside trained for protracted combat, confident that no assault could succeed. Commanders calculated that even if cut off, the fortress could hold for months, potentially drawing enemy resources into attrition campaigns. Supply caches were organized to sustain resistance. Tunnels provided redundancy, escape routes, and storage for ammunition and provisions. Every measure reflected a strategy built on static defense, a fortress meant to compel enemy engagement. The contrast between Japanese expectation and American strategy was stark. While the defenders prepared for combat, U.S. forces advanced elsewhere. Amphibious operations targeted lightly defended islands, establishing airfields, and creating staging areas for future assaults on the Marianas and the Philippines. The fortress, formidable in isolation, became irrelevant to the immediate operational objectives. Troop movements, supply lines, and air superiority reduced its strategic weight. Japanese commanders observed American landings at nearby islands, but found no action directed against their position. The fortress, in all its preparation, remained untouched, Soldiers inside the walls began to experience a slow, unusual tension. Drills continued, artillery was tested, but no enemy approached. Reconnaissance flights circled overhead, yet no landing craft appeared. Radio reports hinted at distant battles but provided no immediate threat. The psychological impact was subtle yet profound. A fortress built for total engagement faced a war that ignored it. Officers reassessed plans repeatedly, yet the strategic reality was clear. The fortress was being bypassed, isolated by design rather than by miscalculation. By mid-1944, the pattern was undeniable. American operations moved steadily through the Pacific, capturing airfields and establishing forward bases. The fortress's guns remained silent, its troops contained but largely irrelevant. Japan's defensive vision, predicated on the fortress's invincibility, collided with the mobility and strategy of the United States military. What was intended as a linchpin of defense became instead an isolated testament to engineering and human labor, waiting for a conflict that would never arrive. This strategic divergence sets the stage for examining multiple angles: the human experience of soldiers, the technological mastery of construction, the tactical reasoning of planners, and the broader moral and psychological consequences. Each perspective reveals a layer of understanding about why an invincible fortress was never tested in combat, and how strategic choice reshaped its role in history. Inside the fortress, life was regimented and unrelenting. Soldiers adapted to confined spaces, underground tunnels, and the constant hum of artillery drills. Daily routines followed precise schedules, guard rotations, equipment maintenance, ammunition checks. The air was often damp and heavy with the scent of concrete, oil, and sweat. Soldiers spoke in measured tones, aware that any misstep could compromise defenses. Yet there was also a quiet pride, an understanding that their efforts had created one of the most formidable defensive positions in the Pacific. Training exercises simulated attacks, and troops honed coordination under the supervision of officers who insisted on perfection. Morale fluctuated between confidence in their invulnerability and frustration at isolation. Communication with the outside world was limited, and rumors of battles on distant islands arrived sporadically, fueling a mix of hope, fear, and impatience. Soldiers maintained vigilance, yet the anticipated enemy never appeared, creating a psychological tension unique to a fortress built for war that would never come. The fortress represented the apex of Japanese engineering in the Pacific. Reinforced concrete walls exceeded 3 meters in thickness, interlaced with steel supports. Tunnels penetrated the volcanic bedrock, connecting gun emplacements, command posts, and ammunition depots in a network designed for redundancy. Artillery positions were camouflaged with foliage and netting, allowing for concealed firing in multiple directions. Anti-aircraft emplacements covered every approach from the sea and sky. Engineers employed a layered design philosophy, overlapping fields of fire, subterranean storage, and blast-resistant structures. Each feature reflected meticulous planning to withstand bombardment from aircraft and naval artillery. Observation posts, often atop cliffs or integrated into the rock face, allowed early detection of ships and planes. In effect, the fortress was a self-contained defensive ecosystem, demonstrating advanced construction techniques under wartime constraints, yet entirely dependent on the enemy choosing to engage. Strategically, the fortress exploited natural terrain to maximize defensive advantage. Cliffs and volcanic ridges limited possible avenues of attack, funneling enemy forces into pre-designated kill zones. Bunkers were positioned to provide crossfire coverage, while hidden machine gun nests allowed defenders to engage from multiple angles. The fortress's artillery could target both landing craft and inland positions simultaneously, creating a layered defense system. Trenches, barbed wire, and obstacles slowed attackers and amplified the effect of pre-registered fire zones. Japanese planners assumed that an enemy assault would be frontal and protracted, and every measure reinforced this assumption. From a tactical standpoint, the fortress was nearly perfect in isolation. Its design ensured that any force choosing to attack would face attrition, confusion, and potentially catastrophic losses. Its placement and configuration reflected a strategic mindset rooted in static defense rather than operational mobility. Commanders overseeing the fortress faced dual pressures, constructing an impregnable position and maintaining the readiness of the garrison. Officers monitored every aspect of daily life, inspected artillery and fortifications, and coordinated training exercises to simulate potential assaults. Leadership emphasized discipline and cohesion, ensuring that every soldier understood their role in a broader defensive network. Yet, strategic command at higher levels in Japan also reflected rigidity. Planning focused on holding territory at all costs, underestimating the possibility that mobile enemy forces might bypass strongholds entirely. While local leaders maintained morale and readiness, they could not alter the strategic reality. The fortress's potential would remain largely theoretical. The juxtaposition of competent tactical leadership with inflexible strategic assumptions defined the fortress's role in the larger conflict. The combined human, technological, tactical, and leadership perspectives illustrate a paradox. The fortress, engineered to resist overwhelming assault, would not see the battle it was built for. Its defenders trained for months, preparing for engagement that never came. Its guns, meticulously positioned, never fired in anger. And yet, the lessons embedded in its construction and operation persisted, revealing the interaction between human ingenuity, military engineering, and strategic misalignment. From the perspective of American forces, the fortress was a known quantity, a heavily fortified position catalogued through reconnaissance and intelligence. Aerial photography revealed gun emplacements, anti-aircraft positions, and hidden bunkers. Intercepted communications provided estimates of troop strength, ammunition reserves, and supply lines. Commanders faced a clear choice: assault directly or bypass entirely. Previous campaigns had demonstrated the lethality of well-prepared Japanese positions. Attacks on Tarawa, Kwajalein, and Peleliu had inflicted heavy casualties and strained logistics, proving that frontal assaults on fortified islands were costly. With this experience in mind, U.S. planners elected to isolate the fortress, cutting its supply lines and neutralizing its strategic importance without engagement. The fortress, in effect, became a non-combatant in the broader conflict, watched but never attacked. From the enemy's perspective, the fortress represented a calculated risk to be contained, not eliminated, a testament to the effectiveness of American operational mobility and strategic prioritization in the Pacific theater. The existence of the fortress imposed profound psychological effects on both sides. For Japanese soldiers, it was a source of pride and a symbol of invincibility. Yet it also carried the weight of expectation. Men were trained to endure, to resist indefinitely, and to defend a position that might never be tested. The monotony of drills and the absence of combat bred a quiet tension, a form of anticipatory anxiety unique to isolated strongholds. Conversely, American planners and soldiers experienced a different psychological calculation. Knowledge of the fortress's strength demanded respect, yet the decision to bypass it required confidence in operational strategy and the discipline to leave a formidable enemy intact. Strategically, the fortress created a moral paradox. Immense preparation and human effort were rendered irrelevant by broader operational choices. Both sides were forced to confront the implications of war beyond the battlefield. The psychological weight of preparation, the frustration of inaction, and the uncertainty of human cost. The combination of human experience, technological achievement, tactical planning, leadership, enemy assessment, and psychological impact paints a comprehensive portrait of the fortress's role in the Pacific War. Each angle reveals a unique dimension: the soldier's daily reality, the ingenuity of construction, the strategic foresight of planners, and the paradoxical consequences of being ignored. Together, they set the stage for the next phase, the decisive moments of the war, where strategy, mobility, and circumstance would determine the ultimate fate of the fortress. By mid-1944, the Pacific theater had entered a decisive phase. American forces executed a series of amphibious operations that would determine the path toward Japan's inner defensive perimeter. The fortress, formidable and fully armed, remained untouched, a silent sentinel as battles raged elsewhere. Commanders launched assaults on the Gilbert and Marshall Islands, capturing airfields and staging areas essential for the continued advance. Intelligence confirmed the fortress's continued strength, yet strategic calculation dictated avoidance. The decision to bypass it reflected a new paradigm in Pacific warfare: mobility and attrition over static engagement. The fortress's guns, though fully operational, never fired on approaching US forces. Observation posts reported distant landings, but none threatened the stronghold directly. Troops maintained their drills. Artillery crews tested coordinates, and officers recalibrated firing angles for targets that never appeared. In effect, the fortress became a prison of preparation, its defenders bound by their own readiness while the war progressed around them. Communication with Japanese command indicated growing concern over isolated positions, yet reinforcements were impossible. The fortress, strategically perfect, had become operationally irrelevant. Meanwhile, American planners advanced with precision. Amphibious landings relied on coordinated naval gunfire, air superiority, and well-trained infantry. The bypass strategy minimized casualties, allowing forces to focus on islands of immediate strategic value. Nearby Japanese positions, similarly fortified, were cut off, their garrisons left to ration supplies and maintain readiness in vain. The contrast between expectation and execution became stark. Japanese engineers and commanders had prepared for a siege. The siege never came. The psychological impact within the fortress deepened. Soldiers trained for engagement, yet no attack materialized. Drills became exercises in futility, ammunition stockpiles remained untouched, and tunnels echoed with idle footsteps. Officers struggled to maintain discipline and purpose. Reports from reconnaissance planes overhead only reinforced isolation. The fortress, once the pinnacle of defensive strategy, existed in a vacuum, its potential unrealized. Strategically, the bypass had consequences beyond individual fortresses. By isolating strongholds, American forces maintained momentum and preserved manpower. Resources that would have been consumed in direct assaults were redirected towards successive operations, culminating in the Marianas and later the Philippines. The fortress, though powerful on paper, no longer influenced the broader campaign. Its presence demanded respect and caution, but it could not halt the progression of war determined by mobility, logistics, and operational flexibility. Within this context, the turning point emerges not from battle, but from strategic choice. The fortress's fate was sealed by inaction. American commanders calculated risk, assessed value, and opted to advance around the position. The defenders' expectation of engagement, their confidence in invincibility, collided with a reality defined by mobility and selective targeting. The climax is thus a paradox, a moment of decisive impact achieved without combat. The fortress remained unbreached, yet its strategic relevance dissolved. The stage was now set for final consequences. Isolated and effectively neutralized, the fortress awaited a confrontation that would never arrive. Its defenders continued routines, drilled scenarios, and monitored empty horizons. American forces pressed forward, their momentum unstoppable. The contrast between readiness and irrelevance, between expectation and reality, defined the turning point. It was a quiet moment, absent of explosions or bloodshed, yet it marked a decisive shift. The war's progression rendered the fortress obsolete before it could be tested. As American forces advanced across the Central Pacific, the fortress remained a ghostly presence. Reconnaissance confirmed its intact defenses, artillery emplacements unmoved, tunnels undisturbed, observation posts manned. The garrison maintained readiness, yet no enemy assault materialized. Nearby islands fell under American control, airfields were secured, and naval dominance established supply lines that rendered isolated Japanese strongholds strategically irrelevant. The fortress, formidable and meticulously engineered, existed in suspended animation, its potential for combat unrealized. The decision to bypass reflected the evolving doctrine of the United States military. Island hopping emphasized speed, surprise, and operational economy. Assaulting every fortified position was unnecessary. Controlling critical nodes allowed forces to isolate enemy garrisons and sever resupply. The fortress, while tactically impressive, did not obstruct the broader campaign. American planners recognized that cutting it off would achieve objectives without incurring the heavy casualties demonstrated in previous engagements, preserving troops and materiel for decisive battles closer to Japan. Inside the fortress, Japanese soldiers confronted a paradoxical reality. Their training, preparation, and discipline were unmatched, yet increasingly irrelevant. Officers drilled their men, recalculated firing arcs, and inspected ammunition stocks, but each action echoed with futility. Soldiers noted the absence of combat with unease, balancing pride in their construction against the frustration of inaction. Morale remained steady but strained, anchored to the belief in invincibility even as isolation grew. Supplies, carefully stockpiled for prolonged engagement, remained untouched, and tunnels echoed with the quiet rhythm of a war that had moved on. Attempts to reinforce the garrison were impossible. Japanese command, aware of the fortress's continued strength, faced critical supply shortages and logistical impossibilities. Air and naval routes were dominated by Allied forces, preventing the arrival of reinforcements or material. Communication with command became sporadic, messages delayed or intercepted. The fortress's isolation became complete, an operational tomb maintained by its defenders' discipline rather than combat necessity. The wider war underscored the effectiveness of bypass strategy. Nearby fortified positions, once considered threats, were neutralized through containment. American troops focused on capturing strategic airfields and staging areas, creating logistical hubs to support successive operations. The fortress, for all its engineering mastery, exerted no influence over the movement of the war. Its guns, artillery, and machine positions never fired upon advancing forces. Observation posts monitored empty horizons. The fortress's very existence became a study in strategic irrelevance, where meticulous preparation collided with operational pragmatism. The climax of this narrative lies in the quiet inevitability of isolation. No storm of shells, no infantry assault, no aerial bombardment defined the turning point. Instead, it was the convergence of strategy, mobility, and circumstance that determined the fortress's fate. The defenders' anticipation of engagement, their confidence in impenetrability, and the fortress's formidable defenses were rendered moot. The Pacific War progressed, reshaping the significance of what had once been a linchpin of Japanese defensive doctrine. By late 1944, the fortress's role in the conflict was definitively fixed, a silent observer of history in motion. Its defenders maintained routines, drilled scenarios, and monitored approaches, yet the enemy never appeared. American forces pressed forward, victories accumulated elsewhere, and the strategic calculus rendered direct engagement unnecessary. The turning point was not marked by destruction, but by the decisive neutralization through inaction. The fortress, invincible in every measurable sense, had been bypassed, its guns silent, its tunnels empty of combat. This moment establishes the framework for aftermath, the consequences of a fortress built to resist, yet strategically ignored, and the broader implications for Japanese defense, American operations, and the psychology of soldiers bound to an untested stronghold. The fortress, though untouched by direct combat, left tangible consequences for Japanese forces. Soldiers remained confined within reinforced walls, tunnels, and bunkers, fully supplied yet increasingly aware of their isolation. Supplies stockpiled for protracted engagement sat unused, while nearby islands fell into American hands. The strategic design of the fortress, intended to delay or repel enemy forces, had failed to influence the broader course of the war. Its guns, artillery, and observation posts, while operationally perfect, had no opportunity to affect enemy movements. Isolation carried psychological weight. Soldiers trained for battle found themselves performing drills for an engagement that would never occur. Officers maintained strict schedules, inspecting ammunition, recalibrating artillery, and conducting training exercises. Yet each day reinforced a quiet tension. The enemy had bypassed their defenses, leaving the garrison in stasis. Morale remained disciplined but strained, anchored in pride of construction rather than combat accomplishment. The fortress became a monument to effort without effect, its value measured in potential rather than action. From a strategic perspective, the fortress's inaction highlighted the effectiveness of American operational doctrine. By bypassing heavily fortified positions, U.S. forces preserved manpower, minimized casualties, and accelerated the campaign toward Japan's inner defensive perimeter. Adjacent Japanese positions, also bypassed, experienced the same fate. Cut off from resupply, constrained by geography, and ultimately neutralized through containment rather than combat. Intelligence and reconnaissance confirmed that these fortresses, formidable on paper, posed no immediate threat when isolated. Japanese command faced material consequences. Reinforcements could not reach the garrison, as air and naval routes were dominated by Allied forces. Communications were limited, delayed, or compromised. Strategic planning, based on the assumption that such strongholds would anchor defense lines, proved increasingly obsolete. The fortress's isolation prevented it from fulfilling its intended role, revealing a critical flaw in static defense strategy when confronted with operational mobility and selective targeting by an enemy capable of bypassing fixed positions. The physical state of the fortress remained largely intact. Heavy artillery, reinforced walls, and interconnected tunnels were preserved, a testament to engineering and labor. Observation posts, anti-aircraft positions, and gun emplacements were ready, yet unused. Engineers and soldiers maintained systems meticulously, but the battlefield had shifted elsewhere. The fortress, meant to be decisive, had become a silent observer of war, its structural integrity untested. This outcome underscores the broader consequences of strategic choice in the Pacific theater. The fortress's isolation preserved its physical form, but nullified its operational impact. Human labor, technological mastery, and tactical planning, meticulously executed, were rendered strategically irrelevant. The garrison's experience reflects the paradox of preparation without engagement, discipline without purpose, and strength without effect. The lessons extend beyond the individual fortress. American strategy demonstrated that mobility, intelligence, and selective engagement could neutralize formidable defensive positions without direct combat. Japanese reliance on static fortifications, no matter how well engineered, could not overcome operational flexibility. The fortress's untouched state highlights the evolution of warfare in the Pacific. Decisive outcomes were achieved through strategic calculation rather than brute force, rendering previously invincible structures functionally irrelevant. Beyond the fortress itself, the consequences of bypassing reverberated through the Pacific campaign. American forces continued their advance, securing islands with strategic airfields and staging areas critical for the approach to the Marianas and the Philippines. By avoiding frontal assaults on heavily fortified positions, the United States minimized casualties and preserved combat power, creating momentum that would carry through successive operations. The fortress, formidable yet ignored, became a symbol of the shift from attritional warfare to operational mobility. Japanese command confronted the strategic implications of these choices. Isolated garrisons, including the fortress, could not alter the trajectory of the war. Reinforcements were impossible, resupply impossible, and communication limited. The strategic assumption that fortresses would anchor defense lines was invalidated by operational realities. In effect, Japan's most elaborate defensive constructions were sidelined, their human and material investment unable to influence outcomes. Reports from command noted both pride in the engineering accomplishment and frustration at its irrelevance. Soldiers inside remained disciplined, but the strategic value of their presence diminished with each American landing elsewhere. On a human level, the bypass affected both defenders and attackers. Japanese troops inside the fortress faced months of inactivity, performing drills and inspections while the war unfolded elsewhere. The psychological strain of preparing for combat that never came created tension and uncertainty. Conversely, American planners benefited from the strategy's efficiency. Troops engaged in decisive battles elsewhere, gaining experience and preserving morale. Casualty reports from nearby bypassed positions confirmed that inaction could be as effective as engagement, highlighting a new form of strategic warfare, one that neutralized the enemy without confrontation. Quantitatively, the impact was stark. Artillery remained unused, ammunition stockpiles intact, and tunnels undisturbed. No casualties occurred within the fortress due to combat, Yet the opportunity cost of maintaining a fully staffed garrison was significant. Resources tied to the fortress could not be redeployed to reinforce positions under threat elsewhere. From a broader operational perspective, the fortress's existence demanded caution but not engagement, a silent testament to the limits of static fortifications when faced with a flexible adversary. Historical records and after-action reports emphasize this strategic evolution. U.S. commanders in memoirs and intelligence analyses noted the value of bypassing heavily defended positions. The fortress exemplified the principle: formidable defenses, if circumvented, could have minimal operational impact. Conversely, Japanese leadership recognized the flaw in static defense doctrine. The fortress, an engineering marvel and symbol of invincibility, illustrated the disconnect between tactical perfection and strategic relevance. Its untouched state became a cautionary example of human and material investment rendered moot by operational choice. The fortress's broader historical significance emerges in this context. It represents the tension between engineering, human effort, and the evolving nature of warfare. Massive fortifications, no matter how meticulously constructed, could be strategically irrelevant if adversaries prioritized mobility, intelligence, and selective engagement. The Pacific Campaign demonstrated that war was no longer solely determined by the strength of walls, artillery, or personnel, but by the ability to exploit flexibility, timing, and decision-making. As the war pressed toward Japan, the fortress remained intact yet isolated, a silent observer of a conflict that had moved beyond it. Its human, technological, and tactical mastery existed in stasis, preserved but strategically neutralized. The consequences of bypassing it illustrate the decisive effect of operational choice. The war was won not by destroying every fortress, but by choosing where and when to engage, rendering even the most invincible positions effectively powerless. The fortress stands in history as a paradox, invincible in design, yet irrelevant in outcome. Its walls, tunnels, and artillery embody human ingenuity, discipline, and the rigor of military engineering. Soldiers trained for engagement, officers planned for protracted defense, and every structural detail reflected an expectation of battle. Yet the war moved on, indifferent to preparation and reputation. Its silence became its defining feature. This episode illuminates a fundamental truth about warfare. Strength is not measured solely by fortifications or manpower, but by strategic relevance. The United States bypassed the fortress, applying mobility, intelligence, and selective engagement to achieve objectives efficiently. In doing so, it demonstrated that operational choice could neutralize even the most formidable defenses. The fortress, though untouched, exerted an influence indirectly, shaping tactical decisions, demanding reconnaissance, and testing the discipline of its defenders, but never directly altering the course of battle. There is a human dimension to this history. The soldiers inside endured months of readiness without action, their discipline tested by monotony and isolation. The engineers who built the tunnels, poured the concrete, and positioned the guns saw their work preserved but never tested. Their effort became a testament to diligence and skill rather than combat effectiveness. The psychological weight of preparation without engagement, of pride without fulfillment, underscores the often overlooked dimensions of war, patience, anticipation, and the silent labor behind strategic constructs. In the larger context, the fortress exemplifies the evolution of warfare in the Pacific. Mobility, intelligence, and strategic calculations surpassed static defense. Its untouched state challenges traditional assumptions about invincibility, illustrating that no fortress, however formidable, can dictate the flow of a conflict when strategic decision-making favors flexibility and timing. The story of this fortress remains a lesson in the limits of engineering, the demands of human endurance, and the decisive power of operational choice. It waits now in memory, a structure of concrete and steel, a product of human labor and ambition, silent yet enduring. Its significance lies not in battle, but in the intersection of human effort, strategic thought, and the relentless movement of history.